What's good, folks? Family, friends, loved ones, enemies, frenemies, wizards, witches, muggles, mudbloods, people of Middle Earth to a special post-game edition of Disguise Coverage, the only podcast in existence that gives you an equal amount of blueberries in each muffin, and presented by the best pizza in Buffalo, New York. That is One Pipe Pizza. Find the online menu in the episode show notes, whether here on YouTube or whichever podcasting app or platform you are listening to this show on. I am your host, Anthony Prohaska. Find me on Twitter at pro__ant. That's pro 2_ANT. In tonight's episode of Disguise Coverage / potential group therapy for those who are pretty disillusioned after the poor performance for the Buffalo Bills in week 2 of the preseason against the Pittsburgh Steelers. I'm looking in the live chat right now, and some of the comments are not great, which is understandable for some. And we're going to dive into all of that in tonight's episode. I don't think there's any mystery to lead into what this episode is going to be about, similar to what it was last week after the Colts game, diving into, Bills post-game, who they just played, the who's, the what's, the how's, the why's, the good, the bad, the positives, the standouts, the structural pieces, players, coaches, anything and everything. I just looked really quick and I just see the two comments back to back. I just see oof, and then I see that was brutal. And yeah, it was less than ideal. And we're going to dive into all of it. But as we do here on the show, this is funny because AJ also tweeted this at me. AJ says, I'm here for the group therapy. I like it. Well done. I respect it. As we do here on the show, I love the engagement. I love the back and forth, whether it's the engagement in the chat with, you guys and girls with each other or with me, the back and the forth. Any questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, philosophies, ideologies, maxims, anything that you folks have, throw it up into the live chat, especially after a game like this where emotions may be, even though it is the preseason, emotions may be running high for some. So whatever you got, throw it up into the chat. I will bring up anything and everything as much as I can throughout the entirety of this episode. As always, super chats get priority because, one, I respect the monetary donation. Two, I see the color and it attracts me away from my notes and I pull it up ASAP. And again, before we dive into the detail analysis pieces and all that, I want to start with some opening thoughts and really questions from the live chat from you folks. So I'm just going to kind of scroll back and go through and see where's your heads at before I really get into kind of what I think in terms of breaking this down. I always like to gauge the temperature of the room and see where everybody is right now. Kyle coming in and saying that was certainly something. Oh, this is where the takes go very far. This comment here says, nice carryover from the Bengals playoff game, ... no defense. That's a bit, man, we're getting into that already. Okay. Oh, what an experience to say what today was in the least. LMAO. Kaiir Elam is a bust. Wow, we're going hard. Okay. Oh, Rich with some positivity saying that game was perfect for them. McDermott gets to tell them they're crap and they will work harder to get ready for the season. Shout out here to Tommy Doyle. Taking off the field on the cart in the aircast. Dude who went down last year with the torn ACL. Looked like he avoided serious injury last week, came back, played this week, and I don't like to see injuries, so I closed my eyes. I saw him down on the ground. I looked away at the replay or when the replay came, so I don't know how bad it potentially looked. But shout out to Tommy Doyle. Hope he is as good as possibly can be. It's never good to get taken off on the cart, let alone in the aircast. So prayers and hopes and well wishes out to him. And hopefully it's somehow nothing. And if it is something serious, the best to him for a potential speedy recovery and hope he gets back as healthy and strong as possible. What else? Yeah, poor Doyle just got back from the injury. Aiden coming in and saying it's preseason and I already need a hug. Nick says I'm not too optimistic on the O-line. Walter saying the rookies were good at least. Another person who's here for the group therapy. I respect it. And I respect it. Man, Marty just going for the throat, burn it all down and fire everybody. That's fair. That's very fair. Elizabeth coming in and saying the O-line is more concerning to me than the defense. Nick saying they look out-coached. Most of the penalties were pre-snap. The refs buried them too. Steelers got all of the calls. Patty asking why so sloppy in terms of the performance for the Bills. I appreciate Teddy. Teddy coming in saying, I love Anthony's intro more than anything in the world. I appreciate you, Teddy. I love that you love the intro. Fantastic. Dobbs coming in and saying Dawkins nearly got Josh killed twice. Aiden, I'm trying to think optimistically, but I'm hoping the offensive line penalties and poor performance can begin to fix themselves with time as they gel. Sal coming in trying to be a voice of reason, saying there's no prizes for preseason wins. LOL, relax, everyone. Oh, Marty going for the throat again. Set a point spread, coward. Spencer Brown versus Turnstile. Oh. Cole coming in. I think it's Cole. I found out from mispronouncing that. Apologies. But Cole coming in saying it may be preseason, but looking that bad is unacceptable. Walter saying similar thoughts here. I don't care if it's the preseason. 13 penalties is a concern, and most of them were with the starters. Tiny Van Living say I'm just here to overreact. Carl saying, Ant, keep talking about the offensive tackles and the O-line. Is Dion that bad? We're going to get into it. As we start to roll through here on this episode, and a lot of the comments that I've gone through already, reading from you folks, and I don't think it's any shock or any type of novel idea at this point. The performance of the offensive line and awesome. I'm glad I pronounced it right. Thank you very much, Cole. Awesome. I think the performance of the offensive line was, and I shouldn't say offensive line. I think a lot of it gets grouped in together, but I do want to say, as always, as I said last week, and as I say all the time consistently, offensive line and defensive line play, as well as run fits, as well as secondary play, I always like to reserve final evaluation until I've seen the all 22 tape and really focus on everything. Getting a proper view from getting a proper view and or evaluation from broadcast tape is not ideal. And in my eyes, not appropriate for offensive line play, defensive line play, run fits, and secondary play. So I do want to say, take all this with a bit of a grain of salt from that perspective. I appreciate this. And is a brave man. The night is darkest before the dawn. And so I figured I'd just throw myself out here to the wolves and see what we got from everybody in the live chat, my live comments. But I appreciate you recognizing my courage and my strength in this moment. But yeah, I don't think it's any surprise if anyone is concerned about the offensive line. And I say offensive line just as a broad term, but I think the tackle play, again, not a shock or surprise to anyone, was extremely concerning tonight. I think we'll start there on the offensive side of the ball. Man, it just, for me, and if you are a regular watcher or listener of this show, my concern for the right tackle position has been noted since last offseason. This is a really good comment or question here from Efren saying, biggest concern, right tackle or middle linebacker? That's for me, I'm going to say right tackle, but that would be an interesting poll to have. I might put that on Twitter. I'm going to make sure I give you credit if I do that. That's a very good potential juxtaposition there. I've been banging the drum for support at the right tackle position all off season, and not just from a Spencer Brown perspective, but from an overall depth perspective. You run out a group that, until Shell was signed, it looked like you were rolling out Spencer Brown, and then Quessenberry was going to be the backup, or Tommy Doyle was going to be the backup. And then you're sitting there and looking at that group from top to bottom, and it's not ideal. Then they bring in Brandon Shell, and Shell wasn't great with Miami, but it's like, okay, I guess serviceable as an upside, has played in the league, has some starting reps under his belt, but still not ideal. Right tackle has been my biggest concern for this team back-to-back years. And the question or the caveat that has been thrown in with Spencer Brown left and right, when anytime there's been evaluation or critique of his play, and this is what I'm about to say, as I've noted on the show before, has been and is fair. Last year's performance, the back injuries throughout the offseason and preseason didn't get to gel with the rest of the offensive line. The injury carried into the season. It affected his offseason prep and the chemistry with the offensive line. It affected his in-season performance, so on and so forth, yada, 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 yada. Okay, understood. But the point with all of it was, yes, he was hurt. Yes, it's understood that he played 8-man football in high school. Yes, it's understood that he went to the University of Northern Iowa. Yes, it's understood how raw and green he is and how much of a high ceiling Spencer Brown has as a player. That's all been very understood. But the pushback for me, anytime I've had those comments given back, or when I've received pushback on my evaluation or fear of Spencer Brown at the right tackle spot, has always just kind of been, Well, what does his floor look like? If your thought is, well, he was hurt last year, it's like, okay, I agree, that's fair. But if he wasn't hurt, what would his performance have looked like? What would his floor be? That's been my biggest cause for concern with him. I think the ceiling is still there for Spencer Brown. You see the size and the athleticism and some of the traits and tools, very fun, right? The ceiling is there. The question for me with Spencer Brown going into last season, going into this season, has consistently been, what is the floor? His play has been very mercurial. The up and down roller coaster way that he has performed at the right tackle position gives me very large cause for concern, especially at a position that you need consistency, because it's a premium position and it protects the most valuable asset on the offense and arguably probably the most valuable asset on the team in your quarterback, and in this instance, Josh Allen. And Art Oman says, guys, it's preseason, totally meaningless. There is, some of that to a degree. I don't want to blow everything completely out of proportion here. The Bills not showing up great today or tonight in any way, shape, or form against the Steelers. The penalties, poor special teams play, poor offensive play. I don't think the defense was as bad as some people are making it out to be, but not necessarily what you want to see overall. I don't think this performance means the Bills are done and the Bills are terrible. Just in the same manner that if the Bills had blown out the Steelers in this game, I don't think it means the Bills get guaranteed for the Super Bowl and are the best team in the league. So it is the preseason. But I disagree with the comment here that says it's totally meaningless. You do get glimpses in the preseason of what players can be and what they will be for the season. And in this instance, in a game where your starters went up against the opponent's starters, at a position, okay, just staying on the offensive line right now, and just speaking of the right tackle position right now, you went up against, and actually the offensive line in general, but you went up against the TJ Watts and Cam Haywards and Alex Highsmiths of the world in Pittsburgh, a very formidable defensive line. And yes, the sample size was small because, they only played, the Steelers starters only played like half of the first quarter, if that, on offense and defense. And I think the defensive starters played more than the offensive starters. But it's not totally meaningless because you are getting real reps against high caliber opponents. And while that performance from tonight's game may not be the end all be all for the season, it means something, right? You want to test your mettle against the best of the best. And you go into a game, even if it's only for one rep, even if it's only for a drive, you are going up against other NFL talent. You want to see what you got. And maybe it's a little too much to take one individual performance in a vacuum and extrapolate it and use it to say this is what this team is going to be for the entirety of 2023, which I don't necessarily agree with. But I won't sit here and say that, just because it's a preseason game, the performances tonight were meaningless, especially in regards to someone like a Spencer Brown, who his performance tonight mirrors what we've seen from him previously. And so I think it's fair to see the performance tonight and think, okay, kind of we're strapped into another up and down Spencer Brown roller coaster mercurial performance in 2023. I think it's fair to Deion Dawkins, I think, is a bit of a different card because we have seen him bounce back. We have seen consistency. We have seen good tackle play from him at the left tackle spot. I don't think Deion Dawkins was good tonight by any stretch, but writing him off completely again in a preseason game, I think, is a bit too dramatic. And that's where you kind of have to draw the line. And I'm granted, maybe some of it is arbitrary, and see, this is the comment here from Cole saying, we're all worried about Spencer Brown, but we may have to worry about Deion Dawkins now too. And Lowe comes in and says, Dawkins looked bad, man. And I agree. Like, he had several really rough reps. One against Highsmith that is in my brain, one against Nick Herbig, shout out to Nick Herbig, whose tape I liked at Wisconsin, but like a lot of people, like, kind of worried, like, well, his size and his frame, where does he play? Is he going to have to play off ball? Can he live on the edge at his, size and weight and frame and length and all that? Man, Nick Herbig had himself a night off the edge for the Steelers. He was an absolute terror. Dawkins did look bad. But again, you can at least point to performances from him in the past that make you think, okay, like, and also there are different situations. Deion Dawkins is a legitimate veteran in this league. He's been successful in this league. We've seen good baseline tackle play from Deion Dawkins. I think it's fair to be concerned anytime someone has a bad game. You don't want to see anyone on your team perform bad ever, let alone have a very bad performance where you just get whooped and worked in a variety of ways. Nobody's trying to see any of their starters go out and get mollywopped in a game. Like, nobody wants to see that. But I think for Dawkins, as not ideal as this performance was for him, you can try and play a silver lining game. And I think I think it is fair to, and realistically fair, to see the performance tonight, take it as it is in a vacuum and kind of put it in that vacuum and think that he won't be that poor come regular season time. And again, you can point to performances that he's had in the past. Even when he's struggled, he's rebounded nicely at times. And Lowe says, I'm just afraid for Josh Allen. I understand. I'm afraid for him too. But I think Dawkins, you can at least point to and say, we know what he can be. We know the baseline of play that he has. Everyone has a bad game from time to time. And also, as much as I hate to say this, it is a preseason game. Sometimes maybe dudes just don't show up. And not to give Dawkins a pass at all, because he had several really, really rough reps. But this team didn't really show up at all in this preseason game, which, and they mentioned on the broadcast a bunch, is really odd for a Sean McDermott team, really ever. To not see them show up in all three phases of the game, especially early on, was very odd and a bit concerning. But again, not a regularity for this team. But, I think you look at Dawkins' performance, and I think it's fair to be concerned, right? Especially because there's a decent amount of tape and sample size at this point going back to last season where he's had some rough performances and he's had some up and down performances. But I think you can trust in him to a degree to kind of level that out and be more of that baseline tackle that he's been, that above average tackle. I'm not saying he's a top 10 dude, but a guy who is a reliable piece at left tackle. You know what you're going to get. You have that consistency. You have that stability there. Again, not a great performance tonight from Dawkins at all, but you can hang your hat on to a degree on what he's been in the past. Granted, his more recent play going back to last year, towards the end of the year and throughout the entirety of the season, has been more inconsistent. But the bigger concern for me still is on that right side at right tackle. And this isn't also like an I told you so moment, because again, it's preseason. We'll see what happens come regular season. But I was very concerned coming out of free agency, coming out of the draft, that the Bills didn't address the right tackle position really at all. I thought they did a very good job addressing the interior of the offensive line. They go out and they sign Connor McGovern. They bring in David Edwards. They draft Osiris Torrance. They reinforce that interior. They gave quality attention. They addressed potential starters, and they addressed depth. Like David Edwards, who is most likely going to be your second string left guard, has been a tackle. Or I'm about to tackle. Yikes, I'm falling apart early here. He's been a starting guard on good football teams in this league. Him being your second string guard, granted he's had some injury pieces, right? That's fun having that there, right? Oh, okay, cool. Like good on the interior. You draft Osiris Torrance, and then you get to play the game of, okay, does Torrance win out and he's your right guard, or does Bates win out at right guard? Bates is an above average right guard, not a stud, not an all pro, but a quality dude there, an above average piece. They reinforced the interior. The right tackle spot and the tackle spot as a whole, we really didn't see anything. They, in essence, ran back the same group with Dawkins and Brown. They bring back Quessenberry. You've got Tommy Doyle in the mix. Now I know you've got Vandemark and other pieces there. They bring in Shell. But they essentially ran the same group back as last year and essentially ran back the group that would indicate this is funny as I stumble over myself and Cole says, don't worry, Anthony, you can't be worse than the Bills were. That's brutal, but I appreciate you. Bringing in Shell, running it back with Quessenberry, running it back with Doyle, all these guys. What we essentially were told was Spencer Brown is going to be that right tackle. They believed in him, whether it's, because they really believed that the injury hindered him or they believed that Aaron Cromer could get the best out of him. And again, tonight's performance does not mean for anyone, but specifically, we're talking about Spencer Brown here. Tonight's performance does not mean that Spencer Brown is dead in the water. He's going to have a horrible 2023 and everything is off. And I say that as a person who has been very, very, very concerned about this right tackle spot for 2 years. But at this point, it's extremely concerning. And if you are still on that position or on that hill or on that pillar saying that, Spencer Brown's going to turn it around and he's going to start to scratch that ceiling and he's going to become more consistent. Like I've said all offseason, you basing that or your statement there, you're basing it on hope more than you are actual evidence of what you are seeing. And hope is not a plan. And it seems like Spencer Brown being the right tackle of the future or of 2023 from a consistency standpoint it just seems like with every game, it becomes more and more hope-based. He struggles with technique. He got lifted off the ground in this game by Marcus Golden on a really bad rep. He gets beat around the arc. He gets beat in a variety of ways. It's concerning. So again, I don't think you can see this game and write off Spencer Brown completely and say, this is who he is for 2023. It's over. He's done. But man, his performances continue to be concerning from a pass protection standpoint. I thought he had several really good run reps from a run block standpoint last week against the Colts. He and Osiris Torrance worked well in tandem with one another. And I think Spencer Brown's run blocking has always kind of been a plus for him. That's where you really get to see him lean into his physicality. You see him get to lean into his strength and his size. I love what he does in space as a run blocker. But then even in this game tonight against the Steelers, he pulls on that tackle wrap play, goes to lead through, I believe, through the guard and tackle, wraps around from the right to go through the left, and he just gets popped by a linebacker and stopped dead in his tracks, and I think falls backwards, flat on his back, and I've just never seen him get blown up like that. Now, maybe he didn't see the backer coming, maybe it was just a wrong place, wrong time type of thing, but he's always been able to hang his hat on his performance as a run blocker. When I saw that made me even more concerned. But the pass protection piece has always been the biggest thing for Spencer Brown. And I think seeing that performance tonight, you can't help but continue to worry. Like the Bills are in need of a consistent starting right tackle, and they do not have one on the roster right now. I'm going to stop because I see a super chat from Carl. Carl, I appreciate you being here, first and foremost. I like the comments you've been cycling in throughout the entire episode, and thank you very much for the super chat. You're awesome. I appreciate you. Carl says the right tackle is in front of Josh, and he sees when Brown gets beat and scrambles out and makes plays. Left tackle protects his blind side. Josh does not have eyes in the back of his head, and bad left tackle play can get him killed. That's a fair point. Also, yeah, it's not great either way. Like, at least if you're getting, burned at your right tackle spot and you're a right-handed quarterback, you at least in theory are able to see it more, whether peripherally or with more of your vision, as you said, so you can adjust accordingly. Left tackle is more blindside pieces. So, I think that's a fair point. That's usually why traditionally quarterbacks are usually right-handed. That's usually why the left tackle spot is the more premium of the tackle positions, because they are protecting that blind side, and the quarterback is in theory kind of defenseless if you get a clean rush off that left tackle spot. So fair point there, Carl, but it's concerning either way. And I think that's where we are with the right tackle spot. And again, I say this as a person who's been very worried about Spencer Brown and very critical about Spencer Brown throughout the entirety of these past two seasons, off-season, in-season, off-season, and preseason thus far. So again, I'm not completely writing him off. I don't think you can do that about anyone for any one performance in a preseason game. But I'm going to keep banging this drum that I banged all offseason. The Bills are in need of a starting right tackle. And as I said on Twitter earlier, what's concerning with that, in a vacuum, it's not great because you've got somebody who you penciled, you spent a third round pick on, and who you've believed in despite evidence to the contrary. You had that person not performing well again. But what's also concerning is, given where we are at this point in the NFL calendar, finishing up week 2 of the preseason, you don't have a ton of options. It's not like you can say, you know what, let's go into free agency and bring someone in. You know what, let's go into the draft. Let's make this position a priority. Now you're hoping for a camp cut or some casualties from a roster standpoint. You're hoping that somebody is dangling somebody that you can maybe trade another body of yours for, or trade maybe a day 3 pick for a round 4, round 5 type of pick and bring somebody in. There's no ideal solution that exists out there from a free agent standpoint. I see Jason Peters as a name that's getting kicked around. I know he performed admirably given the expectations for him last year when he stepped in from a Cowboys standpoint, but I have to go back and really watch his tape to give a firm evaluation of whether or not he can come in and be the guy. But it's worrisome at that right tackle spot. I don't think the Bills have a starting caliber right tackle currently on this roster. And I really, 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 really want it to be Spencer Brown. And I think the ceiling is still there. But my question with him has never been the ceiling. My question with Spencer Brown has always been the floor, because he gets really high highs and they're impressive. They're awesome. but he gets really low lows, and it's that roller coaster replay, that roller coaster performance that we get from him, especially in pass protection. His run blocking, again, I want to say and put it out there, his run blocking has been pretty consistent from a positive standpoint. We saw it in the preseason game last week. We've seen it consistently throughout his tenure with the Bills. Run blocking, I don't think he's a concern. I think he's a plus run blocker. The question has always been with his pass protection, and right now, it's worrisome. And you're going into a year where a lot of the teams that you're going up against have real quality guys on the edge. You look at what the Jets are going to be in week 1. You look at what the Patriots have with Judon and Uche. You look at even what the Dolphins have with Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb. You play the Eagles this year, what they have. You play the Cowboys this year with DeMarcus Lawrence and Micah Parsons. You're still going to have to go up against the Bengals again, where they've got Sam Hubbard and they've got Trey Hendrickson. Like, a lot of the teams that are on your schedule this year have quality on the edge and quality defensive lines, and especially in your own conference. And as Hancakes here says, the whole division has a great front seven. Yeah, like, you're going up against quality defensive lines week after week for the most part. I think the Steelers have arguably the best defensive line in football. You have an all-pro in Cam Hayward. You have an all-pro in TJ Watt. I love Alex Highsmith. I'm super glad for him that he got paid. He's been a quality dude off the edge, really stepped up when they had to let go of Bud Dupree and be in that kind of edge number 2, but has functioned as a low-end edge 1 when TJ Watt has been out. So the Steelers got a squad up front, but you are going to play teams that have really good edge play and have really good defensive lines. And then that's in your schedule in 2023 for the Bills, both in your division, in the conference, and in the schedule as a whole with who you're playing from an NFC standpoint as well. So, and I tweeted it earlier, like, it's not like the Bills are going to be playing the Steelers every single week, so you have to consistently worry about that caliber of play, but you're playing a lot of good defensive lines week in and week out. And if you cannot protect your quarterback, and if Brown is that level of a vulnerability to the point that he gets pinpointed and he gets gamed up like Lou Anarumo and the Bengals did to the Bills in the divisional round. They attacked Spencer Brown with delayed blitzes, with stunts, with games. They knew that he was a vulnerability, and they attacked him as such. If you are unable to mitigate that spot, it's worrisome and it's concerning. So as poor as the performance was for Spencer Brown tonight, and again, I say all of this as a person who has been very, very, very concerned about Spencer Brown as a right tackle, and I still don't believe there is a starting right tackle currently on this Bills roster. Don't write him off just for one performance. He can turn some things around, but if you are firmly believing that, and I say that because, I don't want to deal in absolutes now, but if you are sitting there believing, Spencer Brown's going to turn it around, he's going to become that prince that was promised at the right tackle spot, I really just think you're hanging your hat on a lot of hope, because there's not a lot of positive tape from a consistency standpoint and a large sample size standpoint to point to when it comes to Spencer Brown and say, you know what, he's going to clean things up in pass protection. And he struggles in a variety of areas. It's odd to see a guy get beat in so many ways. It's not like he struggles on the inside move, or, he struggles around the edge. He gets beat in a variety of ways. He gets beat around the edge. He gets beat inside. He gets beat through his chest. He gets beat with poor feet. He gets beat with poor hands. It's rough to really watch him struggle. And it looks like we're on board for another roller coaster ride, unless the Bills can somehow swing a trade or find some diamond in the free agent rough to bring in to answer that right tackle belt. But based on what they did this entire offseason, someone said it earlier, like they had an entire, 8 months or whatever to address the position. They believe in Spencer Brown. So seems like he's going to be the ride or die guy at that right tackle spot. Teddy comes in. Teddy, thank you very much for being here. Oh, I think I started to read this as I spoke. This is really awesome. Teddy, thank you very much for being here. Thank you for the super chat. And your comment earlier as well. Teddy says, just wanted to give you a shout out. My favorite dude on the network and always knowledgeable. More than that, though, a legit good dude. Cheers, bro. Oh, I appreciate you, Teddy. That's awesome. There's nowhere to go for this show. There's nowhere to go from here but down. So I feel like I should just end the show and end the stream right now, because nothing's going to top that. So I appreciate you, Teddy. Sincerely, man. That's awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And Devin, I see your comment as well. Thank you very much. I appreciate you. So yeah, I don't want to dwell too much on the negative. I think we've spoken about it ad nauseum. I honestly, I didn't feel like I didn't even have to speak too much on it. I'm probably just going to pull all the comments coming through in the chat. So no, offensive line, concerned, worried, Yes and yes. Left tackle, somewhat worried with Deion Dawkins' performance, but at least you have positive play to look back on and hang your hat on and believe that he can get back to that level. Spencer Brown, if you're believing that he's going to become a consistent right tackle, I still think it's more hope-based than anything else. So I'm very concerned at the right tackle spot. I was coming into this year, and again, maybe this is a little bit of, fulfilling, self-fulfilling prophecy. But I really put my objectivity up against everything when it comes to evaluation. And man, a performance like this tonight has not quelled any of that for me at the right tackle spot. But we'll see what we get going forward. On the positive side for the offense, Dalton Kincaid, right? Looked really good. I think we got to see a glimpse tonight of what Dalton Kincaid can be in this Bills offense. No Dawson Knox tonight, a finger injury, I believe. He was dressed in uniform, saw him on the sideline, saw him on the bench, but he was not active tonight. This is a good comment here from Cole. Cole saying McDermott's glasses are the reason the Bills played so bad. Sean McDermott's glasses, these past 2 preseason games have been a bit more trendy and hipstery for him than I thought he had. They have been very much like, like he's a New Yorker, like hipster living in like meatpacking, and he's wearing those glasses and a Carhartt Scully, but the hat isn't all the way down. It's like propped up on his head. It has been a bit of an interesting turn for him with his glasses. So I second that notion. Dan coming in and saying Dalton was great. Yeah. I was pleased with Dalton Kincaid. Last week's performance against the Colts, he was lined up more inline, more as that tight end that was attached to the line of scrimmage. And we saw that a bit tonight as well. But we got to see more of him this week against the Steelers in that slot as more of that receiving tight end than the blocking tight end role. And he had several really good reps. He had one early on with Josh Allen, a nice little, sit down route over the middle, roughly out of the slot. Allen found him. Nice catch, got forward a bit. And then we saw 2 other routes, one against man coverage. The other, I believe it was against zone, but I'm not completely positive. The first of his next 2 catches, he had 3 total. The first one was with Allen. The next one after that, the second catch, that was against man coverage. Steelers brought a blitz. He comes out of the slot, hits a head fake at the top of his route, plants that left foot, gets inside, creates instant separation, catches the ball, gets upfield. And then he had another one lined up against Holcomb, the linebacker for the Steelers. Similar deal, sticks his foot in the ground, head fake, gets inside. But this time you see him clear the contact with a little swim, clears the hands, gets inside, plucks the ball out of the air, doesn't have to adjust his gait or his stride, keeps moving forward. Dalton Kincaid looked good tonight. And this is something that I've stated on this show, and I think a lot of people have echoed based on what he showcased thus far in training camp. He just looks really smooth and polished already for a rookie, and at a position that traditionally does not see a lot of high-end performance from rookies, that position being the tight end position. He looks to potentially break that mold a little bit, especially with how he fits into this offense and with how he can be used. So very, 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 very encouraging performance from Dalton Kincaid. And again, I think this was just a glimpse, getting to see him line up in the slot. And part of his success tonight, I think that's even more encouraging, is you're getting to see that matchup bind that teams are going to be put in. Especially the one where he was lined up against Holcomb, who's a linebacker. I believe the Bills were in 11 personnel. So he's in that slot to the left. The Steelers have to match that with a linebacker, because if the Steelers, which I believe they were in nickel, so their slot corner is on the other side with whoever was playing the slot receiver spot for the Bills. So the Bills are in a 2-by-2 look, which means if your slot receiver is on that side and Kincaid's on this side, you have to match him with a linebacker or spin a safety down if you're not comfortable in what your linebacker is going to do. But if you spin a safety down, then you potentially already give away what kind of coverage you're going to play with a single high piece. You don't necessarily want to do that against Josh Allen and the Bills, so on and so forth. But it's an example of the bind that you can put defenses in. The Steelers sit there, they leave Holcomb on Kincaid, and Kincaid works him. It's going to be a problem for almost any linebacker in the NFL to match Dalton Kincaid in space with his fluidity, his size, his athleticism, his quickness, his speed, and his route running polish and technicality. So really nice performance from Dalton Kincaid, really encouraging on a night that the offense looked disjointed and inefficient and turned the ball over a ton, especially with the second and third team units. He looked really good. So very, very, very encouraging performance from Dalton Kincaid. I want to see what O'Cyrus Torrence did. Again, I'm gonna reserve the evaluation once I see the all 22 and can really get into the tape and grind away and see what's up with Torrance's performance. But from my initial eye test, I think he was okay. Shout out to Gabe Davis. tonight. Several good catches for Gabe Davis coming from Josh Allen, including the one that it got called back because Brown held on the play. It was one where Golden kind of lifted Brown off his feet, got into his inside shoulder, but then Brown held him with his inside arm. It was like that 2nd and 24. Allen found Davis, brought it over his shoulder, got both feet down. Nice to see what Gabe Davis did. And I think we got back last week. We saw more of a strong performance from the depth receivers last week against the Colts. We saw what Andy Isabella did. We saw Keyshawn Johnson. We saw Aitman. We saw a nice touchdown from Patman. Shavers had several drops, but then had some nice plays. I think in this game, we saw more strong performances from the guys that are in theory towards the top end of the depth chart. So we got to see a nice performance from Gabe Davis. We saw a really nice catch from Sherfield, kind of going up and getting it, and then us being able to see the benefit of him having that bigger and thicker frame, which we talk about all the time here on this show, that it's an advantage for him as a run blocker, as that power slot guy, because he can dig out safeties, he can crack down on nickel corners and linebackers and even edges because he's big, he's strong, he's got a good solid frame, and he's a willing blocker. But you see that size and frame also pay dividends for him as a pass catcher. He goes up, he is in a completely vulnerable state. He's up in the air. He's focused on the ball. He's coming down to the ground. In theory, he's a defenseless receiver. Safety comes down, pops the hell out of him. Sherfield gets right up, shakes it off. Safety stays down because he feels like he kind of ran into a brick wall. So nice, encouraging piece from Sherfield. Last week, we saw him execute more in a run blocking standpoint. This week, we see him pull off a nice catch for him as well. So I was very encouraged. Granted, small sample size, but by that catch from Sherfield. Also saw nice catch for Deontay Hardy. Out route, I think on that drive that ended with an interception in the red zone for Barkley, Hardy in the slot, leans in to his man, gets to the marker, puts his foot in the ground, shakes, get outside, creates separation, gets upfield a bit. We saw some quickness from him. So again, more performances from the top of the depth chart wide receivers in this game, whereas last week we saw performances more towards the depth wide receiver area of the group. So encouraging performances from the weaponry in this game. But again, I think the positives are largely outweighed right now, largely outweighed by the concerns that we saw on the offensive line, particularly at the tackle position. But again, shout out to Gabe Davis for several strong catches in this game. Really, really, really encouraging performance from Dalton Kincaid. Nice catch from Sherfield. Nice route run from Hardy. Even Justin Shorter, too. Someone who I think everybody last week was kind of like wondering why he didn't see as many snaps. He didn't see any targets. People were literally asking, like, did he even play last week? This time we saw him get more burn and more snaps on the field. We saw him work several catches, a couple nice routes, him using that size and some quickness as well in terms of, creating separation and getting inside guys and making some catches. He took a nice hit on a little in route or a little slant route, got banged inside, but that's, again, bigger, stronger, thicker dude. He's able to survive that hit, popped right back up. So nice piece from him as well. So again, some nice performances from the periphery, tight ends, and receivers as well in this game. But looking at the offense, biggest takeaway here, and again, I know it's preseason, so shouldn't be making any definitive statements about anyone or this team at all after a preseason game, positively or negatively. If the Bills came out and won this game 60-0, I'd be saying the same thing. It's preseason. But I think, it's very, very, very fair to have a ton of questions around Spencer Brown and be concerned and worried about that spot. I've already been on that train, and I continue to sit firmly in my seat and hold my ticket up because I am very worried about that right tackle spot. I think the floor for Spencer Brown is still low. We're still going to see that mercurial performance, and it's concerning. And you can correct for that, whether it's with Josh Allen or whether it's, with tight ends or running backs chipping and giving him help. But it's just annoying to have to do that, and it does handcuff you a little bit, and we'll see what happens. Deion Dawkins, not a good performance tonight as well, but has a history of being a more consistent, stable player, even if he hasn't been recently towards the back end of that last year and this year. But more confidence in him going forward. But we'll see what happens. That's the biggest takeaways for this offense. Scariness up front with the offensive line, and then some strong performances from the periphery guys. Nice catch and run for Andy Isabella tonight. we'll see what happens with that battle and that storyline in terms of whether or not he can make this team, make this roster, how many receivers they keep, how many receivers they don't. Him getting looks as the number one returner tonight, which is interesting as well. So we'll see what Andy Isabella is and if he can crack this lineup, which, I think if you really want Andy Isabella to make this team, that means probably Shorter's not, or Shakir is not, or they're keeping 7 receivers, which seems like a long shot. So we'll see what really happens. This is a good comment. I was going to tweet this earlier, and I didn't. This is fantastic from Lauren. Lauren says, can Andy Isabella play right tackle? I saw one earlier too that was asking if Andy Isabella could play linebacker. Or no, somebody just said put Andy Isabella in middle linebacker, problem solved. So this is very funny. I like this. I like this a lot. Maybe, we know he's got speed and quickness, and maybe he's got enough strength. He's the GOAT, so I don't doubt that he could do anything. This is a very good joke. I like it. Fair to be concerned overall with this offensive performance. We'll see what happens next week, but don't panic. Don't freak out. This game is not indicative of who the Bills are going to be on the whole for the entirety of this season. But that comes with a caveat. I do think it is fair to be very concerned with the performance of Spencer Brown and worried about what he's going to be for 2023. And for my money, I don't think the Bills have a starting NFL caliber right tackle currently on the roster. So take that take that as you will. Take that for what it's worth. Something like that. I don't know. Shout out to the sponsor before we switch into our next topic and break down the Buffalo Bills defense from this past game. One Pie Pizza, the best pizza in Buffalo, New York. And I'm not just saying that because they're a sponsor. I had some of it earlier today. Oh, delicious sweet sauce pie, cup of char pepperoni, great cheese to sauce ratio, homemade blue cheese. When you get toppings and different veggies and stuff, like they chop them all up evenly and sprinkle them evenly across the pie. Like, it's just cooked to perfection. They also do a lot of drives and initiatives for the community in the city of Buffalo. So when you get one pie, you're doing your taste buds some good, but you're also doing the community and the city and the town some good as well. So go and get yourself some One Pie Pizza. Find the online menu in the episode show notes, whether here on YouTube or whichever podcasting app or platform you're listening to this show on. Now let's pivot to the defense. I'm going to start with the linebacker spot and starting more with a notice than anything else. So we had that first, 64-yard touchdown run for Jaylen Warren early on in the game for the Steelers. I want to confirm with the tape, but because again, this is a run fit issue and you really need to be able to see it probably from all angles. I'm fairly confident, again, take this with a grain of salt because it's from a broadcast angle. I'm fairly certain that Dodson was supposed to scrape over and force that back inside when Warren gets through. It looks like Dodson gets grabbed and he gets turned and sealed, and Warren goes through that outside spot. Milano and Dodson end up effectively in the same gap, and there's that whole Warren gets the corner and turns it upfield. But again, I want to see the tape to confirm for that. Regardless, he comes out, I believe, after that series. Starters stay in. AJ Klein takes Terrell Dodson's spot at linebacker. Klein then continues to see the reps with the ones. Then we see Matt Milano come out for Dorian Williams. We see Dorian Williams playing with Klein. Then we see Dodson eventually go back in. Dodson was playing late into this game, late into the second half, which is a significant development for someone who 2 weeks ago before the preseason game, Bobby Babich was saying, Dodson and Bernard were kind of the head of the linebacker competition, and they were trying to figure out who was going to win that job, and they had a plan, and they wanted somebody to show themselves sooner than later. And then here we go last week, Bernard goes down. Looks like everything is kind of lining up for Tyrell Dodson to be that guy at linebacker. Doesn't have a great game last week. Did not look to have a good game this week. Again, I want to confirm, especially from a coverage standpoint, and that run fit perspective in this game. But it almost seemed like, again, this is purely speculative, but it seemed like AJ Klein leapfrogged Tyrell Dodson on the depth chart in this game. Like the fact that they put Klein with the ones and Dodson played into the fourth quarter, man, again, it's speculation in terms of narrowing down what this linebacker competition is, but for my money at this point, I don't care. It's all just a concern. The fact that we're sitting here, the fact that AJ Klein could potentially, and this is no disrespect to AJ Klein, he has been a quality linebacker in the league for a while. His time with the Panthers, his time with the Saints, right? Like he was a quality dude on multiple teams. He's just not that guy anymore. With how many miles he has on the tires, with how long in the tooth he is, and his skill set. He was never holistically a coverage guy. The longer you get, the more your wheels kind of diminish, the harder it is for you to function in coverage. I still think AJ Klein is good coming forward and playing against the run, but he's not going to be that coverage guy. He isn't that guy who really for most teams should be in the running for a starting linebacker spot. The fact that he is for the Bills potentially is concerning. I think Dodson is a backup kind of dude and not even necessarily a second string dude, more like a third string special teams kind of linebacker. So this position has had me concerned since before the draft. That's why, even though I didn't think linebacker value was great in this draft, I would have been very fine if the Bills took Jack Campbell in round 1 of this draft, but that option never even became available because the Lions took Jack Campbell, and Campbell's actually been playing pretty sweet for the Lions. Shout out to Campbell and what he's been doing there for Detroit. This linebacker spot is a concern. We'll see what happens when Terrell Bernard comes back from his injury. You know, it's funny. He and Dodson seem to kind of be neck and neck, with Dodson a little bit ahead of him potentially. But then with Bernard being injured and being out, it almost seems like Dodson being given the keys has caused Dodson to kind of spiral a bit in his performance, and maybe he's dropped a bit on that depth chart. I still think Terrell Bernard is the least of all evils when it comes to the linebacker options who can potentially start next to Matt Milano this year. I know he's undersized. That's the biggest red flag for me. I don't think he's necessarily a plus starter at any one specific spot in his skill set. I don't think he's a stud. I still don't love the pick from last year's draft. I just think Terrell Bernard is the least of all evils when it comes to that linebacker competition, because he's the only one in that competition who doesn't have a glaring vulnerability or a glaring weakness. Klein and Dodson are both liabilities in coverage. And to be honest, if I had to pick between Klein and Dodson, I would take AJ Klein. And I think that tells you all you need to know about Terrell Dodson and about where this linebacker competition is. I like some of the flashes I've seen from Dorian Williams. I still think it's just he's still too far into the infancy of his career in terms of learning what this defense is, learning what NFL linebacker play looks like, and learning how to play these coverages, let alone call them in the huddle, what to do pre and post snap and all that stuff. I just don't think he's ready. His skill set is fun. I like the arm length. I like the burst. I like the speed. I like all those pieces, right? I like how he can mirror tight ends and running backs and all that, but he needs to get coached up. I never thought he was a realistic option for 2023. We'll see. Maybe if he is become, I don't know, week 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, something like that. We'll see what his trajectory looks like. You know, you can never predict what someone is going to be based on who they are between the ears. This linebacker spot is worrisome and concerning. Similar to what I said with regards to the right tackle spot, I don't know if there's a starting caliber linebacker in this competition between Dodson and Klein and and Bernard right now. Again, for my money, if I had to start one of them, I would start Terrell Bernard right now. I think he is the least of all evils. I think he knows the defense. I think he's smart as hell. He's got experience in this kind of scheme and in match coverages and knowing how to pass off and clamp down and push and all the things that you need to do. And I think he has enough quickness and athleticism and processing ability to get it done. I think that's the piece, right? Regardless of how fast you are or how athletic you are, you can only play as fast as your mind can allow you to. So if you're a slow processor or if you're an inaccurate processor, you're not going to be able to play fast and you're not going to be able to play efficiently. Bernard is able to play to a certain degree because of how good of a processor he is, because of how smart he is. We heard this about him at Baylor. We heard it last year from Leslie Frazier talking about how easily he's able to take what he learns on the whiteboard and translate it to the field almost instantaneously. So for my money, I'm starting Terrell Bernard. I've thought that all offseason. I think it even more so. Now, Dodson just does not look like a dude who can start at this level. And if I had to, I'm starting AJ Klein over Dodson. And I don't want to do that. And for me, I think that's what it kind of, no, again, this is no disrespect to AJ Klein, but he just is not a starting caliber linebacker anymore at this spot. And if we're in a position where he needs to be in that conversation, I think that says a lot about your linebacker depth and your position. Connor says, in all seriousness, this just means that Rapp is going to get a significant snap share. That's fair, but What's interesting is, or not necessarily interesting, but so here's what you get. Because I love the idea of Taylor Rapp as your dime linebacker, but how much you go to that and how much you want to use that sub package, offenses can start to dictate to you by putting you in certain situations with their formations, with their personnel groupings, and then can potentially make you vulnerable. And you and a team knowing, again, I'm just making it up. Say Dotson's the guy, or say AJ Klein's the guy, right? Say AJ Klein is your starting linebacker, but he comes off in passing downs for Taylor Rapp, and Taylor Rapp plays your dime linebacker spot. Offenses can kind of build around those tendencies, knowing what you want to do, knowing that maybe on first and second down or more run defense downs, you want AJ Klein in there. So, okay, maybe you give, more of a run look with your personnel grouping, your formation, and then you pass out of it to take advantage of AJ Klein at that linebacker spot, or vice versa. If you're in a passing down or a certain situation, you come out in a spread look or in a formation or a personnel grouping or alignment that indicates more of a pass tendency. The Bills sub in and bring Taylor Rapp, and then you run the ball and you run it right at him. And now Taylor Rapp has to fit up against a guard or a tackle who's running down the pike at him coming downhill. When you get into hard siloed sub packages and platoons, it's just worrisome because it's potentially worrisome because defenses or offenses, I should say, can put you into a bind by using that tendency and using what you want to do against you, given situations, personnel groupings, looks, down and distance, situation, area of the field, so on and so forth. So I like that idea. It just worries me that I want to be able to go to Taylor Rapp because I want to go to Taylor Rapp, not because I have to, not because the other guy is a liability and a deficiency. Because if I'm picking up on that and noticing that, NFL teams are, and they're going to be able to exploit it to a degree. And that's where the worry and the cause for concern comes in. But again, understood. And there, I echo some of these comments. Williams saying, I'll take AJ. At least he's never out of position. Nick saying, start Klein, the best we have. I'll take experience. That's a fair piece, right? And I think that's what the conversation is. We'll see what happens when Bernard comes back from injury. Now it's this whole wild card situation in terms of Klein going in with the ones tonight, Dodson playing late into the game with the threes, Bernard being injured. We'll see what happens when Bernard comes back from injury. But man, the linebacker has become a worrisome spot as well. Linebacker and right tackle are both cause for concerns at this point. And I think also fair, let's talk about the corner position. It's funny too, thinking about, maybe we should, this is funny because Paul says, can Spencer Brown play linebacker? I'll say it's funny, just put AJ Klein at right tackle and Spencer Brown at linebacker. Boom, there you go. What I think is interesting I wanted to grab these two comments saying that, I'll take AJ, at least he's never out of position. And then this other comment that said, start Klein, best we have, I'll take experience. I wanted to pivot to the conversation around corner too, because it's funny to see those comments for AJ Klein and how those comments are not echoed in a similar sentiment for Dane Jackson most of the time. Not necessarily by those two people, by William and Nick, but I just wanted to use those comments. Well, this is good from Chris. Chris says, is it too late to re-sign Edmonds? Unfortunately, I think so, Chris. And actually, too, I wanted to say that while Chris says this, I never wanted Tremaine Edmonds to leave. I never thought he was amazing and an all-pro, but I thought he was an important piece of this defense and better than he was given credit for. That being said, I just want to put this out there because I've said it before. I would not have paid Tremaine Edmonds what he got from the Bears. I don't think he was worth Fred Warner, Shaq Leonard, Roquan Smith type of money. I don't think he was worth that average annual value. I don't think he was worth that level of money. So I want to say that I wanted Tremaine Edmonds back and I maintained it all the time. If he left, you'd really start to see what he meant to this team. I mean, hell, even with Milano dropping into the middle with a split high look, Pat Freiermuth makes a touchdown in the middle of the field. We saw a big completion last week from Anthony Richardson over the middle of the field. You're already starting to see some of the vulnerability in the middle of the defense without Tremaine Edmonds. So I wanted Edmonds 1,000% to come back. I would not have paid him what he got from the Bears. So as much as I wanted him back and I knew the defense would suffer without him, I don't blame the Bills for not signing him to that money. I thought that was way too much. And good on him for getting it and chasing it. He might see another big contract with his age. I'm not even trying to make a joke. So again, I wanted to put that out there in case anybody is, oh, well, good job bringing Edmonds back. Edmonds got paid big time. I would not have paid him that money. As much as I wanted him back and I thought he was important to this defense, I would not have paid him that much money to come back to Buffalo. So, but the Bears did. Good on them. Kudos to them. Kudos to Edmonds getting it. But I wouldn't have paid Edmonds that money as much as I wanted him to come back. And looking at the corner 2 spot, Elam had a bit of a rough night. I don't think it was a pass interference. I thought the pass interference on Darnell Washington in the corner, I thought that was a bit ticky-tack. I know his hands got around and on the shoulder pads. I didn't think he necessarily grabbed him. And then the touchdown against Hayward just looks like he's blocking him and drives him into the end zone and then sits and turns around. Really physical play, kind of an unfair matchup. Hayward is listed as like a tight end, but is more of kind of like an H-back, fullback type of role type of thing. So he just gets out physicaled and out muscled and was right there at the catch point, just doesn't get his arm in. I want to see on the tape what the fade ball looked like where he was called for PI on Washington to see if he really grabbed him, clutched him, got really too much on him. The big one for me that I don't say biggest cause for concern, but I think it was a third down and I've seen this other comment multiple times. Dane did not get abused early. He got beat underneath on the catch by George Pickens. The other catch where he was towards the bottom of the screen, that was more on Taron Johnson, I believe, than Dane. And then Dane popped the hell out of the receiver and dropped him. And then Dane had a pass breakup later. I don't think Dane got abused at all in this game. He gave up an underneath catch. And then I don't think the other one was necessarily his fault. And also like underneath catches when you're kind of just letting things go in no cover zone, I don't necessarily think is your fault. Or I wouldn't classify that as abused. I guess he got targeted to a degree, depending on how you want to look at it, but I wouldn't say abused at all. He had a good PBU on one play. Another, I don't think it was necessarily his responsibility in coverage. And the other, he got, pick and sat down on a little hitch route underneath and got some space there. But I don't think Dane got abused at all. The rep that I really want to see on tape, was Elam against Calvin Austin, who I really liked last year coming out in the draft. Man coverage, I think it was on third down. If you're watching it on the broadcast or trying to remember it from the broadcast, Steelers were on the right side of your screen. The Bills were on the left side of the screen. Elam is up in press man, which is his bread and butter, where he likes to live, where he is most comfortable. And Austin's a good route runner, especially in close quarters. But Austin he runs a little slant on him. It just hits him completely, turns him around, gives up the inside, gets him. It was similar to, ironically, the route that Dane Jackson got beat on against Amon-Ra St. Brown last year against the Detroit Lions. And it's just, it just seems like Elam is sometimes in the right place, but not at the right time. And then is sometimes at the right time, but not in the right place. And there you go, Jim. Oh, so I was right. Jim Kelly coming in and saying Elam got cooked on that third down release by Austin. Yeah, I think it was a third down. But I do want to see it on tape and see what's up. I don't think Elam was completely awful. I know everybody's saying, I saw some comments earlier saying he's a bust, saying that he's awful, that they should trade him, that they should get rid of him, so on and so forth, all these other pieces. I don't think you can write him off at this point. He's going into his second year. I really like to hold out firm evaluation and concrete statements on a guy until they have exited year 3 of their NFL career. But and as Cole says, Elam was poorly coached at Florida. Yeah, there was a whole bunch of nonsense going on with what happened at Florida and all those pieces, and then the scheme change, yada, yada. I will say, and I'm on record saying it, I didn't love the Kaiir Elam pick. I had him a tier below several other corners. I didn't have a first-round grade on him, but I didn't think the pick was bad last year, especially when you hear him speak and you know what he's got going on between the ears and how he approaches the game and the tools and the skill set and the traits and all that. Like, I liked it from what it could be long-term. I didn't love it in the moment, and I didn't love him necessarily holistically as a prospect based on the most recent tape. I know the year's previous tape was better, yada, yada, so on and so forth. But seeing him struggle early isn't necessarily a complete surprise to me. And even though I did not love the pick, I don't think you can write him off at this point. And again, even some of his reps tonight, like where he got beat, they weren't awful. He's not out there being completely abused and looking like a guy who shouldn't be on the field, but you are seeing that inconsistency. And I think that is why, going back to last year, going into this offseason, going into all these games, we keep seeing this conversation, or I shouldn't say we, but I see it a lot on the show here in the comments. I see it on Twitter a bunch where he should be starting and Dane Jackson should be benched and Elam should be starting and yada, yada. Elam just has inconsistencies in his game. I think part of it is adjusting to the NFL. I think part of it is adjusting to the scheme. And I think some of it is just, him trusting himself or trusting his ability. Even last week when he got called on that hold in the first quarter, I believe, against the Colts, right at the top of the route. He's in phase. He's watching the hips. He's mirroring the receiver, and the receiver breaks down. Instead of breaking down with him, he just breaks down and he grabs. He reaches, he grabs, and he pulls on that collar, and the corner tries to, or the receiver tries to come out of his break, and he gets tugged this way, and you see the flag get thrown. There's just those little pieces where his technique is off just a little bit, or he doesn't trust his eyes, or he doesn't trust in his technique and what he's seeing. And then you do see at times where he does trust in that. You see him break on that smoke screen to Tyreek Hill on that Saturday night game against Miami. You see him with the pass breakup against Mike Gesicki. You see him with that tremendous interception against Mahomes in Kansas City last year in week 5. Like, you see those flashes from Kaiir Elam from a positive standpoint, but then you also see some of the flashes from a negative standpoint. And man, like, I think that's just where he is right now. I don't think Elam's a bust. I also don't think he's ready to be the corner 2 for a team. And if that means he needs to be in a platoon, so be it. If that means, I know everybody's going to be super pissed and upset with this, but if that means he has to sit a little bit more and watch from the sideline, again, potentially so be it. I'd rather have him be a strong, solid corner by year 3 than necessarily rushing him out and having him be a vulnerability in year 2. And for the people who keep clamoring for, he needs reps, he needs experience, he needs reps, he needs experience, he keeps getting those reps and getting that experience, and he keeps showing that inconsistency and keeps having certain failures that are repeated over and over again. And that isn't on the coaches. Some of that is on him. At a certain point, you have to take what you're taught and take what you are showed and put it into practical application yourself. Especially when we look at the biggest thing that's a cause for concern with me for Kaiir Elam is Sean McDermott's tenure in Buffalo. His track record with the secondary has been tremendous. He gets Trey White at the end of the first round, who, granted, is a first-round pick. I don't remember seeing a lot of people saying, oh man, the Bills just got a lockdown all-pro corner in Tre'Davious White. That's not what happened. He helps turn Trey White into an all-pro. He brings in Micah Hyde, who was a jack-of-all-trades DB in Green Bay and a punt returner, turns him into an all-pro caliber safety. Same thing with Jordan Poyer, who was an afterthought in free agency coming away from the Browns with the injury concerns, turns him into an all-pro. Gets Taron Johnson as a fourth-round pick, turns him into one of the best nickel corners in the game. Takes Dane Jackson, who is a seventh-round corner. Takes Levi Wallace, who is a UDFA, turns them into starting caliber corners. May not be sexy number 1 corners or high-end 2s, but taking a UDFA and Levi Wallace and turning him into a low-end CB2 is a success. And it was enough to the point that when his contract was up in Buffalo, he got signed by another team, and now he's a starter with the Pittsburgh Steelers. That's in part because of McDermott identifying what he could be and coaching him up to get to that level. Dane Jackson, again, is not the sexiest, is not this all-pro stud corner. He's not overly big, strong, fast, athletic, anything, but he gives you a high floor at the position. McDermott was able to coach Dane Jackson up to the point that he's a low-end CB2 or a high-end CB3 on your team. What's concerning for me is with all of that, with that positive track record Sean McDermott and his staff have with defensive backs, safeties, corners, boundary and slot corners, that successful track record that McDermott and his staff have had in Buffalo. What's worrisome to me is that Kaiir Elam, who has all these tools and who has all the traits, still can't put it together. And I don't want to give the coaching staff a pass because there's a lot that goes into player development, right? Some of it is on the scouting department, scouting the right guy and seeing the right traits and the right skill set and seeing the right games and having enough sample size and evaluating the player properly, right? Some of it is on your coaching staff being able to coach that player up and maximize who they are and maximize who they can be. Some of it is on the player for putting into practical application what they're learning and then getting the right learnings, which is also on the coaching staff. It is not an exact science to get a player from A and put them to B, or to get a player to realize their ceiling and maximize who and what they can be. It is not an exact science at all, which is why players burn out and fizzle out and bust all the time. It's why the draft is largely a crapshoot. It's really tough, but it's concerning that Sean McDermott and his staff have gotten so much out of the majority of the defensive backs that have come into Buffalo, either by free agency or via the draft. And he has gotten so much blood from the defensive back stone. even when there isn't a lot of blood to give, i.e. Levi Wallace and Dane Jackson. And here you have Kaiir Elam, who's got a ton of blood. He's got the size, he's got some length, he's got strength, he's got the frame, he's got some thickness, he's got the speed, he's got all these traits. And for some reason, it's just not clicking. And a lot of the conversation I've seen with that not clicking, people putting it onto Sean McDermott and the coaching staff's shoulders. And again, I think there is some blame to be put there, right? But I don't think enough is being put on the player side. And I say that as a person who wants Kaiir Elam to start. Myself and Eric Turner did the film room with him several weeks ago. Dude is so smart. You saw that in the embedded series last year when he was drafted. But, literally, I'm saying this from firsthand experience, talking to him off air and on air. Dude is smart as a whip. He's got a tremendously high football IQ, and he's got all the traits, and he's got a lot of fun skill set pieces that you want to see in a modern corner. For whatever reason, it's just not clicking. And you see a game like this today where he's in some position and he's struggling a little bit. He's just not putting it together. And I don't think you should write him off. I say this as a person who didn't love the Kaiir Elam pick and who thought Dane Jackson should have started over him last year. And at this point, this year, given what we've seen, I want Kaiir Elam to be the guy. But I'm saying this as a person who has kind of doubted him at certain turns. Do not write him off, right? I know he's been grabby. I know last year they had to put him in the gloves. He's grabby again this year in camp. We're seeing, multiple PIs these past couple of weeks. We're seeing him, again, not rely on his technique and kind of fail at the catch point. Do not give up on Kaiir Elam right now. And just as a general rule of thumb, this isn't necessarily even my rule. This is kind of just an overall rule of thumb for evaluation. You don't really want to slam the door on anyone positively or negatively until they complete their third year, even if they're amazing as a rookie or amazing as a second-year guy, or they're terrible as a rookie, terrible as a second-year guy. You want to give those 3 years to a player to see what they can be. Kaiir's going into year 2. And I think what's unfortunate for him is right now, Dane Jackson is the more consistent option at corner 2. I think the coaches know that. I think the players know that. Again, when I sat down in the film room with Eric Turner, when we talked to Dion Marlowe a couple weeks ago, he was talking about the safeties, but I think this applies to the corners as a whole. He said, what McDermott looks for in the safeties is somebody he trusts. He wants somebody who he trusts will be at the right place in the right time, who's got that reliability and that consistency. And I think that applies to his secondary as a whole. And that's what Dane Jackson is. He's usually in the right place at the right time. Maybe sometimes he doesn't make the play at the catch point, and he's not the biggest, he's not the strongest, he's not the more scheme versatile, so on and so forth, and all these pieces, right? But on the whole, he's reliable. And that's why he's ahead of Kaiir Elam right now. I think Kaiir Elam's ceiling is still way, way, way ahead of what Dane Jackson's ceiling is. But the floor for Dane Jackson is higher right now. And I think that's why he's ahead at CB2. Now, that does not mean Kaiir Elam's done. It doesn't mean he's a bust. It doesn't mean the Bills should trade him. It doesn't mean that's a horrible pick. We'll see what happens, right? Dudes, sometimes it just takes a moment or a specific coaching lesson or coaching tool or a specific game or some kind of light bulb to just click, and all of a sudden the switch flips and it happens, right? We like the moment that happens in movies and TV shows all the time, where all of a sudden something just clicks for the main character and they completely change and become successful and yada yada and all that. Not even to make it corny or that proverbial example, but maybe there's just that moment that exists out there for Kaiir Elam, but right now it hasn't happened. He's not the more consistent player at corner 2. If we see a platoon, we see a platoon. If we see Dane Jackson, we see Dane Jackson. But I don't think there's a doubt in the coaching staff's mind, and there's not a doubt in my mind, that Dane Jackson isn't the more consistent corner 2 option right now. I don't think he's got a higher ceiling, and I would love Kaiir Elam to be the guy. I love scheme versatility. I love fast, strong, athletic corners who can match up against a variety of dudes and a variety of coverages. I would love Kaiir Elam to be the guy. And I know the Bills want Kaiir Elam to be the guy. They drafted him to be the guy. They want him to win the cornerback 2 job. But he hasn't at this point. And Dane Jackson's more reliable and more consistent. Christian Benford, I like his physicality. I like some of the play. He continues to be like kind of a fly in the ointment. I'm really happy if Christian Benford is corner 4 on this team on the boundary. If he wins it out and becomes corner 3 or corner 2 at some point, cool. I think you would see, if Dane Jackson, anything happens to him, I think you would probably see more of a platoon between Benford and Elam potentially. I like the physicality of Benford. I like what he does. He got called for, I think, a flag today that I didn't agree with. But I think Benford gives you some good options and fun options there. Even that, I think, speaks to the coaching staff and the scouting department, right? I know there's a lot of people who like Christian Benford. Christian Benford was a super late day 3 pick that got ID'd and coached up to the point that he was living as corner 2 last year and playing well against guys like Tyreek Hill in Miami before he broke his wrist or hand or whatever it was. Like, he was playing well early on because Trey was still out, and then Dane got hurt, and the Bills had to start Benford and Elam, and then Benford went down, and it was Elam and Jamarcus Ingram, and it was just a rotating door and a mash unit at the corner spot. I like what I've seen from Benford too. But I think all of that goes to the larger conversation of corner 2 is a muddied mess, depending on how you're looking at it. I think Dane Jackson is, and I'm not saying like, I think Dane Jackson should be corner 2. Again, I know that upsets a lot of people, but I think he gives the reliability and consistency that gives you a high floor when paired with the rest of the high ceiling pieces on your defense. But mainly my reason for thinking Dane should be corner 2 is just because Elam is too inconsistent, and Elam just has that mercurial play up and down a bit too much. And I want him to be the guy. I still believe that guy exists in him and could happen at some point. But as of right now, we're just not seeing it. And I don't think that means you should write him off. I don't think that means he's a bust. I don't think because he was the first round pick at the back end of the first round and he's not the hands down starter by year 2, that means he's awful. But it's not ideal. I will 100% say that, but we'll see what happens going forward for Mr. Kaiir Elam. What else? Let me go through some comments here. Ooh. Sword is saying Benford is better than Elam. Ooh. Banta says, I always want to go with the higher ceiling, especially in this secondary. They can afford to gamble there. Yeah, but if you're going with a high ceiling guy who doesn't give you a high floor and is inconsistent, that's where all of a sudden you become vulnerable, right? If you go with a high floor, like Dane Jackson, right? You go with the high floor guy. Maybe you don't have the sexy plays and the big splash plays necessarily, but you're not vulnerable and you're not deficient. The issue with going with the higher ceiling guy who's got a lower floor and is more inconsistent means you can get the splash plays like the interception against the Kansas City Chiefs, but you also open yourself up to vulnerability at a certain point with a guy who maybe doesn't run the right coverage that the safety is expecting him to, or doesn't travel across the field in the right way and leaves someone completely open and isn't playing the right technique or the right coverage. It starts to struggle a little bit. Like it's all a fine line. And I don't think there's necessarily a right answer at any point, right? Like, do you want to take the guy with the low floor and the high ceiling because you're banking on those explosive negative plays being generated? Or do you play it more conservative and go with the guy who's got a high floor and Dane Jackson because you've got all pro dudes at the rest of your secondary in a good spot on the offensive line, on defensive line, I should say. Banta comes in and says, I just think you could at least go with Elam until he really hurts you, then rethink it, unless you think that would completely break Elam. That's a good point too, right? Like that last sentence there, like, unless you think that would completely break Elam. Part of it too is you're dealing with the mental strength and confidence of these players. So if you put a guy in before they're ready and they crash and burn, what does that look like for you trying to build him back up and trying to help him gain his confidence back? Then if you put him in now when he crashes and burns and you have to replace him, is he shot for the rest of his tenure here? You take that risk versus kind of letting him, again, build up slowly but surely. And then, he is a plus starter in year 4 and year 5 versus you trying to rush him to be a starter in year 2. And then he's nothing for 3, 4, or 5, or 3 and 4. And you don't even re-up him on the 5th year option. Again, it's what makes the conversation, I think, so annoying because there are so many variables and there are so many fine lines that have to be navigated. And there isn't a right answer. That's what makes player development, again, I said it earlier, it's not an exact science. That's what makes it so worrisome. Kind of be put in that position, or not worrisome, I should say, so complicated in making the right decision and figuring out like who to plug in here, who to plug in where. And this is a good comment here, I think, from Jim. You can't really afford to take the risk of Elam blowing a game with how tough the schedule is this year. And I think that was my conversation for last year, right? Like, you're kind of with where the Bills are as a team, you're caught in this window of you have championship aspirations, so you can't afford to be too vulnerable or too deficient in one area. But you're also trying to build for the future. So you want to get young guys game experience and allow them to gain confidence and build upon reps. But you don't want to put someone out there who's not ready yet because you can't afford to be vulnerable or deficient in those reps. And so it becomes this kind of catch-22 double-edged sword type of thing. And that's why I think, again, so much of it is muddy. That's why I think Dane started for the majority of last year. So we'll see what becomes of Elam, but it's complicated for all of it. I'm going to grab this comment here from Bant again saying, I feel lame saying it, but I guess that's why you have to trust the coaching staff because they know the guy's mental fortitude. Absolutely. But again, I want to go back to another point I said earlier, when you say you have to trust the coaching staff, I think you also have to trust the coaching staff and their evaluation piece as a whole. Again, and I don't know why it's not talked about enough. Like Sean McDermott's track record in evaluating defensive back talent is pristine in Buffalo. Like, took Micah Hyde from, as a jack of all trades dude, all-pro safety. Jordan Poyer was a cast-off and a nobody in free agency, all-pro safety. Trey White was, good value pick at the end of the first round, turned him into an all-pro. Taron Johnson was a fourth-round pick who's become one of the best nickel corners in the league. You take a UDFA and Levi and make him a CB2 starter who for your team, and then get signed by another team and is a CB starter for you. You take Christian Benford, polish him up, and he's all of a sudden a CB4, 3, potentially low end 2. They've got this strong track record. Dane Jackson as well, for as unsexy as he is, he's been coached up. They have this strong track record of being successful with DBs in Buffalo, both corners and safeties. But with Kaiir Elam not hitting, it's funny to see everybody blame the coaching staff, blaming a group that has a strong track record of getting every ounce of blood out of every stone at the DB position, or most of the stones at the DB position. But then with this specific stone, nobody's blaming the stone. They just blame the coaching staff. I don't think it's right to blame one of them completely at any point. Because again, like I said, player development and evaluation is a very weird science, and it's not an exact science whatsoever. But that's what I think makes the Elam piece concerning for me, is you've got a coaching staff that has been so successful in coaching up DBs, yet they have this guy with seemingly all the tools and traits in the world, and they can't get him up to speed. And I'm not saying that it's not the coach's fault, and I'm not saying it's all on Elam, but considering their track record of success in the NFL, that's what's concerning with Elam for me. But, it's a fair point. Fair point. Z-Mad Mavi says, I personally like Benford. I think Jackson has been easily the best in the preseason, but no doubt Elam has the highest ceiling, so it's tough. And that's exactly it. You're kind of playing this like musical chairs of, which one do I go with? Which one do I go with here? Each one has their own pros and cons and risk reward and ceiling and floor. And you're playing for short-term benefit, but you're also planning for long-term benefit. Return on investment. It's tough. Brandon says, Ant, do you feel personally confident in any capacity in our front against an Eagles or 49ers unit? How can this team truly win a Super Bowl with a seemingly very soft front? I'm assuming you mean the Bills offensive line against an Eagles or 49ers unit, or do you mean the Bills defensive line against them? I will say the opposite side. For me, I'm very concerned for the offensive line. Like, again, okay, cool. Brandon says the offensive line. I'm not very I shouldn't say holistically across the offensive line. I'm fine with Mitch Morse. I know McGovern hasn't set the world on fire, but I'm fine with McGovern. He had a really good rep against Cam Hayward in this game. I'm fine with Torrance, or I'm fine with Bates. I know they each have their own question marks and pieces, but I'm very concerned at the tackle spot, especially Spencer Brown. Dawkins overall has been okay, but I guess if you had to put it with a group as a whole, no, I'm very like if I'm facing the Niners, they're just going to put Bosa up against Brown over and over and over again. And then with what they have on the interior and the rest of that group, like that with Javon Hargrave coming through and having Eric Armstead, like that scares me. So I don't feel great with the Bills O-line against the 49ers front. I don't feel great with the Bills O-line against the Eagles front across the board, but especially at certain positions. But that's the bed that the Bills have made, unfortunately. Yeah, so we're going to have to see what they have. And again, there are ways you can correct it around it. You just have to handcuff yourself a little bit. You have to keep a tight end attached to the formation. You have to provide chip help a little bit more. You have to try and game things up a little bit because you can't just rely on your front five to go out and block. So, yeah, we'll see. That's a good question though. But no, I don't feel confident. Long story short, to answer your question, TLDR, don't feel great. Real quick, as we start to kind of move forward and wind down a little bit here, if you haven't already, if you're enjoying this content, please, and thank you, drop a like on this video. Likes go a long way towards helping myself and the entire team to track and trend in front of more eyes and ears. So if you enjoyed hanging out here, or if you're enjoying being here still, whether live, not live, later, whatever have you, please, and thank you, drop a like on this video, if you would be so kind. It goes a long way. Likes are the lifeblood for these streams and how they affect the algorithm. So please and thank you, drop a like on this video. Nick says the offensive tackles are the only concern for me. Yeah, that's really, really where you are, especially at right tackle. Like, I don't think the Bills are. This is a great comment from Pops. Can the tree play right tackle? No, the tree is retired. Unfortunately, the tree doesn't. The tree hung up his pads and his cleats a long time ago. Yeah, that's my biggest concern. I think the Bills, if they had an average right tackle, I think if you look at the offensive line as a whole, it's an average to above average offensive line. I think the Bills, if they had consistency at right tackle, they would be like, I don't know, like a top 15, 14, 13, 12-ish type of offensive line, which I think is fine. And I think you can win a Super Bowl with that kind of offensive line, given the quarterback play and given the weapons that you have. My issue is I think Spencer Brown's inconsistency drops this group down to kind of like a 17, 18, 19, 20-ish kind of group. And then if you've got inconsistencies from Dawkins, you're living closer to the 20s. If McGovern, I like the McGovern signing, but I still think it's fair to have some questions there. I think it's fair to have some questions around Torrance or Bates. So I don't think on the whole, like the offensive line, even if they had adequate or average right tackle play, I think this would be an average to above average offensive line with some peaks and valleys and some ebbs and flows. But I think with what you've got at the right tackle spot and some of the other consistencies, yeah, offensive tackle is the biggest concern for me by far from a starting standpoint, but also from a depth standpoint. But I think if you look at the group as a whole, there are some concerns across the board depending on how you're looking at it. But the big one for me, yeah, like I'm fine with Dawkins. I'm fine with McGovern. I love Mitch Morse. I'm fine with Bates or Torrance. But Spencer Brown is worrisome. Banta says, can you win a Super Bowl with an average O-line, though? I think it's really hard. You have to, no one's ever going to have the strongest groups across the board. But in theory, yeah, you want to be strong in the trenches offensively and defensively. And I do think with what you have with Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, the rest of the weapons, and what the defense could be, yes, I think this team could win a Super Bowl with an average offensive line. I do think that. I also think, again, if you get consistent tackle play from the right side, this offensive line is an above average offensive line. Not the sexiest, not the best, but I think they can be above average to that degree. Coco Monk says, middle of the league offensive line. Ooh, Josh Allen had to scramble against the Bears last year. Yeah, but that's not the same offensive line as they have this year, is what I'm saying. So McGovern in at left guard, Torrance in at right guard, potentially. It's a different group. You're looking at 2 out of the 5 starters being completely different. Not to mention at that spot of the year last year, who knows who was injured and banged up with what spot. There's a lot of variables to that point, but the biggest ones are 2 of the 5 starters are potentially completely different. And one of those 5 starters was a huge liability last year in Roger Saffold at left guard. So you had a liability at left guard and a liability at right tackle. So it's a different offensive line that it is last year. That's why I said this year's offensive line. But yeah, we'll see. Yeah, so overall, not the most ideal performance in week 2. I wasn't expecting to come into this post-game show and necessarily have to do like I joked about on Twitter, or even at the beginning here, kind of like a group therapy session for this episode and for, again, a spot in the preseason, right? Even if it's early in the regular season, I think it's early to kind of necessarily go overboard with positivity or the negativity, but I just wasn't expecting it for a preseason game. And I think that is a large caveat with everything, right? I think there are certain pieces and aspects of this game that you can be concerned about long-term because they match with concerns we've seen previously, whether it was last year or coming into the offseason. So I think it's fair to carry on some of the concerns. Again, like I mentioned, that the Spencer Brown piece or concern about linebacker or, just the conversation about corner too. But I think on the whole, it's a preseason game. I'm not putting the most stock in the world. Like, I don't think the offense is, if you're coming out of this game worried structurally about the offense or the design or the defense or even the penalties or how they showed up, like the penalties weren't great, how they showed up wasn't great, yada, yada. I'm not necessarily putting all the stock in the world into that. Like, if you thought the Bills were going to win the AFC East and were a Super Bowl contender going into this game, I don't think you should be off of that wagon. If you came into this game concerned about right tackle and middle linebacker, I think it's fair to still be concerned about those spots, right? It's all about sample size and it's all about the perspective and the context for the evaluation. So vacuum spots, individual player pieces and silos, I think it's fair to be concerned as we sit here, kind of, again, breaking down this game and looking at it. As I switch the banner up, as we start to wind down a little here on this episode, I think it's fair to have those individual concerns from a vacuum perspective or a player perspective. And I think that's always tough too, to kind of like balance the two. Like, what do you put stock into? What do you write off and say, it's a preseason game, versus being like, no, this is a problem. This is concerning. And again, I think the Spencer Brown piece, I don't think you should write that off and be like, it's preseason, it'll be fine. Why? Because how he performed in this game is what we've seen from him from a concerning standpoint in the regular season consistently throughout his career. So seeing it again is more like, looks like it's happening again. What we've seen from other pieces of the offense or other pieces from the defense aren't necessarily who they are or who they could potentially be. Add in some of the vanilla scheme pieces and not really, again, game planning for any opponent. I think that throws a wrench into some of the evaluation as well. But there are some pieces to be concerned about. And again, I think the one you're really hanging your hat on to kind of wrap things up here, I think it is fair to be concerned about the offensive line, especially the right tackle spot, really the right tackle spot. And even if you're concerned about Deion Dawkins, I can understand that and I can get behind that to a degree. So I think it's fair to have concerns on the offensive line. I think it's fair to have concerns at the linebacker position opposite of Matt Milano. I think it's fair to have some concerns about Kaiir Elam's development and or performance and or trajectory, and seeing what he's going to be, who he's going to be, and what it means for him in not just 2023, but 2024 and beyond, based on where he was drafted and what the thought was of what he could be with his ceiling. Again, not a fun conversation or necessarily episode to have, especially in August when last week's episode was fun. Last preseason, all the episodes were fun, but sitting here kind of taking stock of everything, it's going to be something that requires a lot of evaluation going forward in terms of breaking out what this team is going to be. And got a super chat. Thank you very much again for still being here, Carl, and for another super chat. Thank you very much. Carl says, do you think they can clean it up by the Jets on 9/11? Yes, I do think certain pieces of the team can be cleaned up. The one thing, like, there are certain pieces that I don't like. I don't think Spencer Brown is all of a sudden going to become a consistent right tackle by the opener against the Jets. I don't think Tyrell Dodson or AJ Klein are going to become fine in coverage and give you a 3-down linebacker spot. Like, there are certain pieces that I don't think are going to happen and aren't realistic to expect. But I think from a structural standpoint, like, again, we're not seeing any game planning. We're seeing very vanilla calls and coverages and concepts. Like, we're not seeing the full bag of tricks on either side of the ball. So that's a huge piece when it comes to what a team is and who a team is. I think that will get cleaned up. I think the focus and determination will be there come regular season. So I think that'll clean up a lot of the pre-snap penalties and a lot of the lackadaisical kind of sluggishness we saw on the field. I think that will get cleaned up. But certain individual player pieces, I don't think I'm necessarily going to become cleaned up. Again, like I said, like, I don't think Tyrell Dodson is going to become a 3-down starting caliber linebacker in the NFL. I don't by the Jets game on 9/11. I don't think Spencer Brown is going to become a consistent right tackle by the opener against the Jets on 9/11. Like, though maybe Spencer Brown in the future. At this point, I think Tyrell Dodson is who he is. Same thing with AJ Klein, yada yada, the conversation we've had. So some of the structural pieces and mental pieces, yes, I think those 100% can get cleaned up. Some of the individual player performances, I don't see them improving too much. And that's where we have to go. But good question there. I like it. Lowe says it wasn't the scheme. It was just the one-on-ones. They were losing badly on that front. It's preseason. It's preseason. It's preseason. Fair. Again, it depends on how you look at it, right? I understand if people think the sky is falling. I understand if people think this is nothing to be worried about and it's just preseason. I think you have to pick and choose what you take, what you put stock in and take to heart from this game. And the biggest things I'm taking to heart are I'm really worried about right tackle and I'm worried about linebacker. That's where my focus is for everything. I'm also very pleased with Dalton Kincaid in terms of what he's been. Those are my three biggest takeaways from this game. I'm worried about right tackle. So you're saying we have a chance. I like that comment there. I'm worried about right tackle. I'm worried about linebacker opposite of Matt Milano. And I think Dalton Kincaid is the real deal. Those are the big takeaways from this game. And again, those aren't just based on this game. They're based on what this game has showed us in conjunction with the sample size we've been provided throughout the offseason or previous seasons in the case of Spencer Brown and the linebackers that we have in competition there. But we'll see what happens going forward in this week. We'll see if Terrell Bernard can come back at linebacker. We'll see what he adds to the mix, and we'll see what happens on the offensive line front for the Buffalo Bills. But that'll do it for us here on this episode of Disguise Coverage. Again, before anybody starts to leave, if you haven't already, we've had a ton of live viewers here on this episode and a ton of engagement. If you haven't already, please, and thank you, drop a like on this video. I hate shilling out for it and asking for likes. I think it's corny, and I think it's corny to say that I think it's corny, but sincerely, like, they go a long way towards helping myself and the channel and the show to go a long way towards tracking and trending in front of more eyes and ears and getting put on the front page of YouTube with the algorithm and all that stuff. So if you enjoyed this episode or just enjoyed, hanging out and listening to me talk or everybody freak out in the chat for the last hour and a half on a Saturday night, drop a like on this video if you'd be so kind. I greatly appreciate it. Myself and the entire team greatly appreciate it. And I see some of the positive comments coming in for myself and the team. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. That's awesome. Thank you. So drop a like on this video if you can. Subscribe to the Cover One YouTube channel in particular. Subscribe to Disguise Coverage as well if you be so kind. If you are here on YouTube, if you are on one of the podcasting apps or platforms, thank you very much for your listen and or your download. Please rate and review and subscribe to Disguise Coverage on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever podcasting app or platform you are listening to this show on. Tell your family and friends and loved ones about how awesome this show is and about how awesome the channel is. If you thought this episode and me are awful and or are terrible, that's fine. Tell your enemies about myself and this show and try and ruin their day or night by making them watch this show. I appreciate you folks sincerely more than you know. Thank you very much to Carl for your multiple super chats tonight. I believe there maybe was another one that came through. Apologize if I missed that one, but yeah, thank you for the super chats. And like I say all the time, sometimes I do episodes with guests, sometimes I ride solo here, but when I ride solo, it's awesome to see all the engagement and the back and forth commentary with you folks in the chat. It makes me sincerely feel like I'm not alone doing the show. So that makes things go a little faster and easier. So thank you to everybody who rode with me live on this episode. Thank you very much for the back and forth with each other. Thank you very much for the engagement with myself, the questions, again, the banter, positive or negative. I appreciate you folks being here and joining me live. If you didn't join me live, again, post live, view, listen, download, YouTube, audio, whatever have you. Thank you very much for your support in whatever form or fashion it comes in. Again, thank you to Carl for both of your super chats. Thank you to Teddy for your super chat and the really kind words that came along with it. Thank you to all you folks, again, for riding with me here late night, Saturday night on this post-game episode edition of Disguise Coverage. And again, thank you for all the super, that's nice. I don't like to pull up too many positive things at all really about myself because I think they're corny. I think it's corny to do that about yourself, but I see all the really nice, kind stuff coming through about myself and the show. So I see it and I sincerely appreciate it. Thank you, folks. And I hope you and your family and friends and loved ones are all doing well and staying safe. Be kind to one another. Take care of one another. I will see you next Saturday live immediately following the Bills' last preseason game of the year. So that'll be next Saturday, again, immediately following the Bills preseason game. And then after that, we will be back to our regularly scheduled Disguise Coverage time, which is live on Tuesdays at 9 p.m. Eastern. But again, next week will be another post-game edition special of Disguise Coverage. I will have a guest for next week's episode, so stay tuned to see who that potentially could be. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday night, folks. I appreciate all of you for, again, whatever form or fashion your support comes in. Thank you very much for everything. I appreciate you, folks. Godspeed. Take care of one another. I will see you next week immediately following the next Bills preseason game. And until then, Godspeed. And as always, go Bills.